I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm proud to be the founder of Campaign Group Transparency Task Force. We are a certified social enterprise based in the UK, but with contacts in 20 countries around the world. As a social enterprise, we have a formal mission statement. It's in our articles, and that is to promote reform of the financial sector so it serves society better. My own background is the financial industry. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But the reason I mention it now is because having worked in the financial industry, I'm very aware that it is a profoundly important part of society's ecosystem. It helps to create economic stability, political stability, and when it's doing what it should be doing, it's a wonderful ally to humanity, to society, particularly in relation to providing for circumstances such as an early death or a house move or planning for retirement and all those good things. But I'm very, very aware as well through my own lived experience that if you give the financial sector room to misbehave, it will misbehave because the incentives to do so are so high. I often think about the quotation from Charlie Munger. The quote is, "Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome." And given that we live and work in a capitalist society, it's almost inevitable that if organizations and individuals can find a way to make money, to generate money, be it legally or otherwise, and get away with it, they'll try to do so. And I'm afraid that what I've experienced in my lived career is the decaying of ethical and professional standards. And I'm going to talk about a mutual organization that I worked for some years. Many years ago, I had a senior management role at an organization called the Australian Mutual Provident Society. I've never worked for an organization that had anything like as good a culture as that organization did. Australian Mutual Provident Society, or AMP, really was absolutely fantastic. It was kind to its staff. The staff were kind to its clients. We all cared about each other and for each other, and we all did the best we could to make sure that individuals were being dealt with fairly and honestly and transparently and with care. I absolutely loved working for Australian Mutual Provident, or the AMP. Years later, years after I left it, it went through a demutualization process, and that mutuality, the loss of that mutuality, had an almost immediate impact on the organization's operational DNA, or if you like, more importantly, in relation to the way that it thought and how it saw its priorities. It started to bit by bit become like any other commercial organization. The focus became profit, the focus became short term, the focus became hitting KPIs and targets and metrics and shareholder return and all that normal stuff. So, through my own lived experience, I've got first-hand knowledge of what it's like being part of a mutual organization. It was wonderful. And I've also sadly seen the demise of AMP. AMP in Australia got into all kinds of trouble, all kinds of malpractice, misconduct, mis-selling, which trashed its reputation in a relatively short period of time. And this is an organization that had spent hundreds of years carefully crafting a second to none reputation. Tonight's event is about the nationwide, but it's also about mutuals more generally. I personally think that anything that's happening that's going to diminish the potential for mutuals to actually play their part in society as a mutual, as a client-centric, member-centric organization is bad news. Very, very bad news. So when James Sherwin Smith and I spoke a little while ago about the work that he was doing, and more importantly, why he was doing it, we connected straight away. We were on the same page straight away. And I said to James, quite literally, we'll do everything we can to help you raise awareness of what you're doing because I believe in what you're doing, because I just know how important the mutual sector of our financial ecosystem is. I could rabbit on for ages, but there's too much good content for me to do that. What I will do now is invite everybody to thank James for setting aside time to prepare for this presentation and presenting it, but more importantly, for dedicating his life in recent time and in the upcoming recent future, if you know what I'm trying to say, to this incredibly important cause that he has connected himself to voluntarily. No one's made him do this. He wants to do it, and that's what makes this such a powerful mission. Can we show appreciation, please, to James Sherwin-Smith? Thank you all very much indeed for doing so. James, I know you've got some A1 content, so over to you, sir. Take it away, James. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Andy, thank you. Thanks for a lovely welcome, everyone. And thank you for letting me address the Transparency Task Force. I'm simply in awe of what you and your team have built. I wish I'd found you sooner, in all honesty. And when we got the opportunity to speak, I think just before last week, I just came away with a really warm sense of kindred spirits. And I'm enormously grateful for this opportunity to address the TTF. So thank you for that. I'd also like to stress something up front, which is Andy and I came up with this title for the talk somewhat on the spur of the moment on our very first call. And I've received a few comments about the title from some of my supporters, mostly along the lines of, please don't tar all building societies with the same nationwide brush. So I'd like to first say there must be some well-meaning building societies out there, somewhere amongst the 42 that we still have in the UK. And I'm hoping that your experience has been better than mine. But ultimately, it's where the subtitle is where I'd like to focus today: why member democracy matters. So, turning the page, why I think it's really important to start with the why. And followers of perhaps Simon Sinek might know his talk about starting with the why. And I do ascribe to his philosophy. I think it's very important to start there. And so this is not about the who initially, it's not about the what, not even the how, it's about the why. And I think it gives me a really important opportunity to set the scene. So building societies occupy a uniquely trusted position in UK financial services. If you look at any measure of brand equity, of trust, they normally rank above the other banks in the sector, right? So building society is different to a bank, and most people reflect that. It reflects on their heritage, how they started, how they built up over time. They present themselves as member-owned because they are mutual societies. Technically, they are regulated by the FCA as the mutual societies regulator, and they definitely put themselves forward as values-led institutions. But what I've found, and you may agree, you may not, but meaningful member democracy is often weak or ineffective in practice. What that means is that the mutual purpose begins to wither, and mutuals begin to behave much more like their non-mutual competitors, like the shareholder banks, etc. And the jeopardy of this is that we could lose a key competitive force that basically keeps shareholder-owned institutions honest, with an increase in consumer harm that could come from that. And ultimately what it comes down to is this: if you have active members, people that engage in their society, that ask questions, they vote, they maybe bring forward their own resolutions, etc., then you just end up with better governance. And if you have better governance, we get positive consumer outcomes, not just for the people that are part of the building societies, but for the entire financial services system. Because if you have mutuals behaving like mutuals, they keep the shareholder banks honest. And so mutual only works, the way I look at it, when members have a real voice. And if you wouldn't mind just indulging me for a moment, this is the only chart I have in my presentation. I might show you one later if we have time. But in my past life, and please forgive me here, I was a management consultant. And yes, I've heard many of the jokes, and no, I don't need to borrow your watch to tell you the time. But one thing that's always stayed with me is this chart. And it comes from a report that I co-authored when I was working for a management consultancy called Oliver Wyman. And what it does is, going along the x-axis, it looks at individual countries and say, how large is the size of your cooperative banking sector measured as the percentage of all deposits that are in cooperative hands? And on the y-axis, it has the number of complaints in that country per 10,000 inhabitants. Now, this is a cooperative bank slide. So at the time when this was made, it was only the cooperative bank itself that was still then a mutual organization. It didn't take into account the building societies, because it was a report that was done for the European Association of Cooperative Banks, of which the Co-op Bank was the only member. And what really stuck with me all this time is effectively this. What this chart shows is that the greater role of the cooperative banks in an economy, the less consumer harm is reported to the Ombudsman. So this is empirical proof that if you have a healthy, strong, large mutual sector, it keeps the other banks honest and you have less complaints in your financial services system. People are being looked after because the mutuals are looking after their customers, who are also their member owners, whereas banks may look to exploit customers in order to benefit their shareholders. So it's a really important element. So that's a bit of the why. So let's talk a little bit more about the who. Who am I and what am I about? So I have some experience in working inside the system, a little bit like Andy referenced earlier in terms of his background. I actually started out as a tech entrepreneur. It was the early days of the internet, the late 1990s, and I started a business with a friend from school called Hitmatic. And then I went to university and I studied engineering, economics, and management at Oxford. And when I left Oxford, I became a management consultant at Oliver Wyman, which was a management consultancy that at the time focused exclusively in financial services. As a brand, it's began to expand. It took on other consultancies, and it's now a more generalist management consultant. But at the time I joined it, it was called Mercer Oliver Wyman, and it was specifically about financial services. I then ended up being, at one point, the CEO and director of a small business lending platform called Growth Street, which was FCA registered. Growth Street was a way that small business could get access to what's technically called a revolving line of credit. But in effect, it was the access to getting an overdraft-like facility without having a current account with that institution. And it was quite innovative in that it effectively matched people who wanted to lend money to businesses with businesses that wanted to borrow money. And it actually asked them to share their accounting data through the cloud, so that as a lending platform, we had a much richer understanding of their financial health and could make better informed decisions about whether to lend to that business or not. Whereas banks only get to look at historic information that's gone through the current account typically. This is actually looking at forward-looking information, because you could see their accounts receivables, their accounts payables, and predict what their future cash flow needs might be. And then my last full-time role was as a general manager or senior vice president at a business called Vocalink, which was acquired by MasterCard and is responsible for running interbank payment systems. So in the UK, Vocalink is the firm that runs, I should say, on behalf of Pay.UK, Faster Payments, Bax, the Link ATM network, and the image-based check clearing system. So all the retail payment systems that move money between the banks in the UK. And it also had an international business, and basically it was taking the Faster Payments intellectual property and exporting that to other countries around the world. And I was responsible for growing that business and its commercial and operational success across 5 different continents. We had business in Canada, the US, Peru, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, parts of Saudi Arabia, as well as parts of the Nordics as well. And then I stepped back from full-time work just over 3 years ago. And since then, I've been using my time and experience to help largely startups in financial technology and payments. I do some angel investing, which is investing in early stage businesses and providing some of my expertise and helping those companies grow. So that's what I've been doing. And a little bit more about my interests and my concerns and my beliefs. So I have a long-standing interest in retail financial services, and particularly the use of technology within it. I have been gaining experience, I would say, in the defense of individual rights versus large organizations. One example would be that I successfully fought for a relative of mine to get back a large six-figure sum who was a victim of an authorized push payment fraud over several years, basically arguing with the bank concerned and the Ombudsman Service. I'm increasingly concerned what The Guardian has referred to in some of the press about me as a democratic deficit within member-owned institutions. And I have a belief that transparency and accountability are prerequisites for trust. If an organization isn't being transparent, if it isn't being held accountable, then trust is clearly going to be eroded. So then why Nationwide? Because you might have recognized that my name and Nationwide is increasingly be used in the same sentence. So Nationwide is, it's just enormous, right? So it has 16.4 million members. This is before the transfer of Virgin Money customers into the organization, which happened at the beginning of April. It is the second biggest lender in the land, second only to Lloyds Banking Group, largely because it has a huge mortgage book. It is the largest building society, not just in the UK, but in the world, right? It stands head and shoulders above the rest, even in the UK. And why I became concerned, first of all, the thing that piqued my interest was the Virgin Money acquisition. It was announced, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me, and there were a number of steps along the way that made me even more concerned. There was no member vote, whereas the spirit of the law suggested there should have been. There was an activity to bring a special general meeting to ask for a vote and make that requirement, which was effectively blocked. And the leader of that campaign, Michael Armstrong, was debanked at the end of that process. The second thing is the virtual AGM. Nationwide is the only building society in the country that operates a virtual-only AGM. You cannot turn up in person. And what it means is it can be effectively, there's a risk of it becoming quite a staged, managed kind of town hall, where the people running the show basically get to choose which questions in the queue they would like to answer. And those that they don't fall down the list. And effectively, they get timed out because the AGM is brought to a close before all questions are answered. And the situation with the virtual AGM at Nationwide is that Nationwide basically said to the members during COVID, because of COVID, we can't get people in person. We need you to pass a change to our rules to allow us to have a virtual only AGM. But please don't worry, said the then chairman, David Roberts, this will only ever be used in exceptional circumstances. 3 years later, in 2023, the new chairman decided to go to a virtual only AGM. No such exceptional circumstances were given. And it's something that the Financial Reporting Council have challenged to say, we're not sure if this legally is allowed, because in the Building Societies Act, it refers to a place where that meeting is held. And it's unclear whether a virtual room on the internet constitutes a place, but perhaps until someone challenged that in the courts, or the government, who's saying they're going to undertake a consultation, clarifies, it's legally uncertain, I think is fair to say. The next is executive pay. So if you're a PLC bank, under the Companies Act, every 3 years, you're required to have a binding vote on executive pay. That is to say that the shareholders vote to say whether we accept the remuneration kind of plan. The Building Societies Act does not have the same requirement, and as such, the Building Societies Act do not have a binding vote on remuneration. Instead, it's advisory, and in some cases, it's also protected by a device called the quick vote. And the quick vote is what Lord Sumption has referred to as a North Korean approach to democracy. The quick vote is a single checkbox at the top of the ballot that's presented prominently, which says if you tick this box, you give the power to the chair to vote the board's recommendations. In fact, the online version, when you check that box, the rest of the voting form disappears and you just get a next box. And it's a pretty dangerous thing in my book. It's used and it's quoted as being convenient for members, but I think it's also clearly convenient for boards. And then Nationwide has this interesting thing that they've introduced in 2023 called the Fairer Share payment. The Fairer Share payment is effectively a payment made to a subset of the members. It's £100, or it has been consistently for the last 4 years. And I would argue it's neither fair nor a share. There is no member vote to say this was a good idea. When the society chose in 2007 that it wanted to give up to 1% or more of its profits to charity, there was a member vote and the members said yes. But this gives away a great deal more than 1% of the society's profits. There was no vote, and it is effectively a distribution of money towards only the members that hold a current account that's active in a certain way, and they have another holding, such as a mortgage or a savings account. This year, Nationwide will pay the fair share to 4.4 million members, but that means that 12 million members get nothing. Some of those have been in the society for decades, have been loyal mortgage or savings customers, have been paying into the society's profits, but they do not get to participate in this share because they choose to have a current account somewhere else. And this is the point where I say Nationwide is a building society. It's about mortgages and savings. It's not about current accounts. It's not a bank. But the society chose to take it in that direction, and that, I think, is a problem. And the last piece is there hasn't been a member-nominated candidate for election to the board in over 20 years. The last time there was one was in 2005. There was a candidate on the ballot. Alan Debenham decided not to fight in 2006, which was the same year that the society introduced the quick vote. The last time there was a member-nominated director who was successfully elected, the last two retired in 2002. And there was one point in the 1990s where there were 3 member-nominated directors that served on the board of Nationwide simultaneously. Effectively, a quarter of the board seats were elected and nominated by the members. You compare that with occupational pension funds. By law, a third of the board seats must be member-nominated. You compare that to one of the largest mutuals in the country that isn't in financial services, the Cooperative Group, the one that runs the supermarkets, etc. They have 4 member-nominated directors, one of whom is currently serving as the interim CEO after the CEO had to step down. But the building societies, while the facility exists in the law and in their rules, it's fallen out of favour, and I think it's because it's incredibly difficult to do. So Nationwide is actually a really important test of whether member democracy genuinely functions. Its significance and scale means that it gets attention. It gets attention from the public because so many people are part of it. It gets attention from the media, and it's definitely getting Parliament's attention now too. And that's why, in a nutshell, those are the theoretical reasons. The personal reasons is my family have been members of Nationwide for a very long time. My parents were only able to buy a house because they had a mortgage from Nationwide. My father, before he died, I think was a member for over 60 years. Most of my family are Nationwide members. We care deeply about the future long-term sustainability of Nationwide. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So when I looked at this, what I discovered is that there just isn't the right balance in my mind between the institution and the members. The scales have tipped heavily in favour of the institution. Key matters are reserved for the board. The board structures heavily favour incumbents. Member participation rates are extremely low. So let's think about this for a moment. Only 670,000 people voted last year. I say only, it sounds like a big number. That is less than 4%. Sorry, it's about 4% of the total members, 16.4 million. Of the eligible members who are allowed to vote, is about 9 million. It's less than 8%. Less than 8% turnout. The voting and governance systems, in my mind, can debase the membership, can weaken it further. So the quick vote, it's been disclosed by the society in the last few weeks, is used by 87% of the members. So effectively, 87% of people are saying, whatever you want, board. And the remaining people are voting using the standard vote and voting perhaps differently along the lines of the resolutions that they care about. But what it means as a result is that most board resolutions get carried by 95%. So there is a major imbalance between institutional power and the ordinary members, in my view. And let's be clear, when Building Society started, there were relatively small, local community-driven organisations. Nationwide, over time, has become enormous. And some of that obvious connect of people who run the society being in part of your society has been eroded. It's a little bit like your GP used to be part of your community, it was your community doctor, but increasingly that common bond of community has been diminished. And what I've found is in fighting this fight, if I can put it in those terms, I'm not really getting much help. There doesn't seem to be many people on side, whether that be the courts, the government, the regulators. I largely have not been entertained in what I'm doing. In fact, if anything, I would say there's been some bias against what I've been doing from these institutions. However, there is some good news, and that's that the newspapers have been enormously supportive. So some of the headlines that I've got along the way, and it's been across a broad spectrum of the political landscape of papers, the Independent, the Guardian, the Times, the Telegraph, City AM, you name it, right? Largely, they have all said, that's interesting, James, we should report on that. So I'm enormously grateful to those journalists that have taken the time to understand some of these complex issues and written articles that unpack those for their readership. So now a bit of the how. What am I doing? So there's a campaign that I started which is simply called James for Nationwide. And what I'm doing is using some of the knowledge I got from supporting the campaign for a member vote on the acquisition of Virgin Money and taking that forward. Because when Michael Armstrong was debanked, I was like, I'd basically been helping him behind the scenes. I thought, he's gone. He can't do this anymore. He's been no longer a member of the society. Someone else is going to have to take the charge. And so that's when I basically put my head above the parapet. And I basically wrote to Nationwide and said, I would like to stand as a member nominated candidate. What do I need to do? Where are the forms? Let's go. I also at the same time studied the law and was tipped off that I could request a copy of the member register from the Financial Conduct Authority. So there is a statutory right in the Building Societies Act of 1986 that says you can apply to the Financial Conduct Authority, you pay an application fee, you submit your communication and your rationale for asking for this, and you can ask for a copy of the member register so that you can contact fellow members and ask them whether they have common issues or they would like to support you in a member-based activity. It's a very much a corollary to what exists in the Companies Act, where if you're a shareholder, you can ask to inspect the shareholder register. The difference in the Building Societies Act is this is adjudicated by the Financial Conduct Authority. So you submit your application, they go to the society objects, yes they do, it comes back, you get to respond, and either party can request a hearing. And that's what I did. I had a hearing with the Financial Conduct Authority in March of last year. It was a private meeting. It was held in secret, despite me asking for it to be in public, so that journalists and other members of the press and the public could join. But in essence, my application was denied, and I was refused access to the register by the FCA. So I then had to start building a grassroots support network, starting with my personal network, to say, I need your help to nominate and elect me to represent our interests. Will you support me? And last year, I delivered 600 such nominations, but the society deemed that I fell short of the 250 valid nominations required. According to them, I only got 150, but there is no way to validate that because it's a black box. There was no right of appeal. There was no ability to scrutiny. Members themselves could not even ask the society, was my nomination valid or not? The society refused to do that. So I then had to go around and think about how do I do this again? And this time I did it with a significant amount of media attention. And on the day that I submitted my nominations to Nationwide on March 30th, the day before the society's year end, as per the statutory requirements, the Times wrote the article, "Let him stand." It seems odd that he is being prohibited from doing something that is legally available to him. And the fact that you're basically saying it's a black box and we can't tell you which are valid and why, and which are not and why, doesn't seem right. And would you believe it? I passed the test this year. I was told I had 256. So I made it by 6. Every vote matters. And therefore I cleared the minimum hurdle of 250, and I've therefore on the ballot. I'm the first person to be on the ballot as a member nominated candidate since 2005. So over 20 years. And what I've been doing is basically escalating public debate about accountability with the Building Society and asking others to think about this and consider joining the cause. bear with me 1 second. My Mac has just crashed. Hopefully this will come back in a second.
If it doesn't work, don't worry. I think we've got them, and it's fine. Yeah, carry on.
Come back.
Yeah.
So the biggest sector-wide issues for me, they are transparency, they are engagement, they are governance, they are accountability, and they are strategic influence. But they all come back to member democracy. And this has been acknowledged by an MP writing to the Chancellor and to the chair of Nationwide, asking some questions about what he's termed emerging governance issues in the building society sector. The 4 areas that he drew attention to in his letter were similar to what I've discussed already. Why aren't there any member-nominated directors on building societies boards? Why isn't there a legal minimum for that, just like there is in pension funds? Why is the quick vote allowed? That is illegal in trade union elections for the executives. You cannot use block voting. You can only count votes that have been voted individually directly for a specific candidate. Why is it there are no binding votes on executive pay? Why is it that it's allowed to have virtual only AGMs? And if the government's consulting on this, can they think differently about the building society sector, given they are member-based organisations, 1 member, 1 vote, and their only real form of scrutiny is through the AGM? So that's what that letter says from Nav Mishra, but he also submitted written questions in Parliament. And they basically were written questions along the same issues as per the letter. And the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Rachel Blake MP, basically replied with a generic answer that covered all 3, which is, thanks for your interest, we'll think about it, bluntly. I've asked Rachel Blake for a meeting because I think really it was a non-answer she gave to those 3 questions, and I think it deserves more attention. So why does this extend beyond building societies? Well, it kind of raises broader questions about consumer rights in financial services. In my view, it also challenges assumptions about institutional accountability. It highlights how democratic structures, in my mind, can be hollowed out over time. This has not happened overnight. It's been bit by bit by bit by bit. It's almost like a boiling frog problem. And for me, it also reflects some wider concerns that have been raised by people like the TTF about regulatory effectiveness and oversight. It wasn't originally the case that the Financial Conduct Authority was the building societies regulator. Once upon a time, it was the Building Societies Commission or even the Friendly Societies regulator. But eventually, when all regulation bodies got merged into the the FSA, it all got collapsed into one, and then it got broken into 2 again, which are the Twin Peaks, the Bank of England with the Prudential Regulatory Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority. And it was like, okay, we'll put the building society stuff with them. But it's it's a bit of an anomaly in that the FCA has a dual role when it comes to building societies. They're not only responsible for conduct risk, so protecting consumers, but they are also responsible for regulating the building societies themselves as mutuals. And the last thing it kind of demonstrates the difficulty of reforming entrenched institutions. So things have been this way, people have forgotten about the past, they may have forgotten about the roots, and we now do it this way because that's how we did it yesterday, and we become very short-termist. So what happens next? So for me, the journey is just beginning. I've got to base camp and I still have Everest to climb. Base camp because I'm on the ballot. Everest because I have to basically run an election campaign with an electorate of 9.3 million eligible voters. The only election of that scale, voting for a single issue that I can think of, is Brexit. General elections, you're only really voting for 1 MP, 70,000 people or so in your constituency. So it's an enormous scale. And voting began yesterday/today. It opened yesterday with a notice of AGM, and people started to receive ballot papers through the post and their codes via email. And this will run until the 15th of July, which is when the AGM is held. electronic voting or postal voting must be completed by the 13th of July. And if you're going to vote in person, you can turn up to the virtual-only AGM. Last year, there were only 400 people there out of 16.4 million. And for me to be successful, I'm going to need at least 350 to 700,000 people to say, I vote for James. Bearing in mind that the society has decided that I am not suitable, and they are recommending to members that they vote against me, so a minus vote. And the power of the quick vote is such that if voting happens exactly this year as it did last year, the board candidates start with 580,000 votes, and I start on against 580,000 votes. So I am in deep negative territory, and I need a lot of for votes to counteract those against votes. I will be elected if I have more for votes than against. It's as simple as that. So there's two ways to do that. Convince people who currently quick vote to not quick vote and vote for me, and convince new people who have never voted before, approximately 8.6 million people, to understand what the issues are and come and vote for me instead. And if they want to, they can vote against the board or other resolutions. That's up to them. But on the basis that the board has chosen to vote for themselves and against me, it seems somewhat fair that other people that I bring in would be voting for me and against them. And I'm hoping there'll be enough of a protest vote that people will take notice. But there's also one other thing on the horizon, this little red dot. And that's something I just want to mention briefly because this is the TTF after all. And I think there's actually some things that I would like to help coordinate in the future that go beyond this year and my campaign and whatever happens next. I think what's needed is to build a coalition for democratic governance. There are a number of institutions that all act individually, but most of them have more in common than they have in difference. And unfortunately, because they're all relatively small organizations, they don't often get a seat at the table. But my view is if we can get these organizations together under one umbrella, they can effectively get voices heard around common issues for the benefit of the coalition. So where I need help, and this is my kind of closing plea, I have until the 15th of July to win this election and be able to represent members' interests on the board of Nationwide. That means consumer advocacy and campaigning support. That means media amplification and public education. That means collaborating with those that already have influence because they have large subscriber bases or followership of their own, that they would be willing to basically me participate in their channels so that I can reach more people quickly. So my question to you is basically say, please get involved. If there's anything that you can do or you can bring to bear, please contact me. There'll be a contact slide at the end. I would love to hear from you. I have a fantastic team of enthusiastic volunteers and supporters, but we're still handfuls of people. And I think this is going to take more like a battalion than a squad, than a small number. So if you're in a position to help and would like to help, please get in touch. And then after the 15th of July, I've prepared to put some more time into this idea for the Coalition for Democratic Governance. So I'm looking for partner organizations that are prepared to put their minor differences aside for the benefit of the common good, that they have governance expertise and have comparative case studies that they can bring to bear, that we can basically bring together through the group, that maybe have regulatory insight or can perform legal analysis on what we need to do to get the regulations or the laws changed, that might be able to help with data gathering or research and scrutiny of institutions to understand what's really going on underneath the surface, and ultimately help build alliances across communities. And that could be financial services like the TTF is focused on, but it could be more broader because there are lots of large member-based organizations across the country, and they make up the fabric of the UK. And I think it's really important that they are represented effectively and we are not all divided and conquered. So that's where that's my plea for help. Why we must win as a summary. It's because mutual ownership without accountability is just performative. It's talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Because reform only happens when people are organized and they persist. I studied the people that had gone before me in trying to do this. I called them on my blog rebels with a cause, and that I am standing on the shoulders of giants. Because learning from their experience, albeit decades ago, is such that very few people get this done on the first attempt. You just have to keep on going. And I'm a relatively young man, despite my appearance, and I have the time and the resources to do this, and I'm determined, and I will not be swayed. Because democracy matters. Ultimately, I think we have a problem in the world right now about the state of democracy, and this is something that we can do to help defend democracy. And I think it's because trust in financial institutions depends on transparency and governance. If you don't have transparency, you don't have good governance, trust is evaporates and society begins to break down. And ultimately, it's because member-owned institutions should genuinely belong to their members. It's not saying that they're member-owned. It's not saying that they're member first. It's living those values. It's living those words. So that's my talk. I'm very grateful for your attention. Thank you for listening to me drone on for a good bit of 35 plus minutes. We've left time deliberately for the rest of the hour to have a discussion or take any questions and provide any answers that we can here and now. In case that people didn't have things queued up to talk about, I had a few different ideas as starters for 10. But I would be very happy to take any questions you might have or any observations or things you would like to share with the group. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for the opportunity.
James, thank you. James's slides will be circulated, and I think that you've managed to deliver a remarkably clear and frankly compelling proposition as far as I'm concerned. James, you've done a great job there. I'm sure others would agree. The slides will be circulated. James, there's a couple of bits I'll cover off if I may, and then we'll go to Kavon Hussain from Consumer Rights Solicitors, who'll share some of his thoughts, and then to one or two others. One of the best speeches I've ever heard to do with the financial industry was delivered by now Lord David Pitt Watson several years ago. We both gave a talk. It was beneath, I should say, St. Paul's Cathedral many years ago. My talk was nothing to write home about, but his talk was absolutely brilliant. And his talk was all about the importance of the financial sector reconnecting with its true original purpose, a purpose which is all about serving society, serving the members. And his talk was so powerful, it literally dominated my tactical and strategic thinking as a campaigner for several years. And I often think about what he spoke about. I link this to what you're talking about, James, for two reasons. First of all, he delivered reference to that speech many years ago in a speech he delivered in the Lords yesterday to do with the Financial Services and Markets Bill. So it's very much front of mind for me right now. But he also spoke about, and he connected the theme to the role of the organizations within the industry, the importance of the primacy of financial organizations seeing themselves as being there to serve rather than to opportunistically create profit for profit's sake. And to my mind, this really kind of speaks to the very heart of the important characteristic of mutuals having a hardwired in their DNA mindset that they exist to serve. If we imagine 10 years from now, 20 years from now, UK financial services being virtually devoid of any mutual building society mindset. To my mind, that's a pretty bleak and harsh culture in financial services. I think we've got the soul of the financial industry at stake here. If we cannot defend the serve customer first, serve member first mindset that exists within the mutual part of the industry, then we've got no real hope for the rest of it. That's why when we talked about the title for the event, you know, battling with the building societies and why we must win, it's that idea of battling for the soul of what the financial industry should all be about. Any comments in relation to that, James? Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that story, Andy, about one person, one voice can, effectively be this earworm that stays for you for so long. And good oratory is always just a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It just leaves this indelible mark. And it's by no means my skill. But I think if something really pulls at the heartstrings, right, it really makes you sit up and notice and kind of think about it. It can have that power. But to your latter point about, is this about the soul of the building societies? Is it about the soul of financial services? About the soul of the country? Given these institutions are so important to people's lives, will I be able to afford retirement? Will I be able to afford a house one day? These things are very, very important. And when the mutuals that are supposed to make that a better outcome for people aren't behaving like mutuals, it really worries me. And so, yes, I think to some degree you could say that this is a battle for the soul of dot, dot, dot. It just depends on your framing reference.
Thank you. And if this is a battle that is lost, we really don't have much of a differentiation across the marketplace, do we, in terms of culture of different types of organizations? It's a moot point. I'll leave it there. But I genuinely think that there is a long-term strategic win here if the heart and soul of the building society's mutual culture can be saved. I'll also quickly mention a couple of other things before we go to Kayvon. We, the all-party parliamentary group in this context, have a survey out and about. I put a link to it in the chat earlier. The survey is to gather people's thoughts about the City of London Corporation. It's relevant to this conversation because many of you will know that the City of London Corporation has got question marks against it in terms of, is it fair? Is it transparent? Is it democratic? I won't spend too much time talking about it right now, but I will invite everybody to complete that very important survey. It does chime with the general narrative of the cultural importance of organizations behaving in an ethical and in a transparent way. One quick question for yourself, James, before we go to Kayvon. Any interaction as such with the Building Societies Association? That's an organisation that some of us tried engaging with in relation to the Building Society scandal or the Phillips Trust Action Group that Gordon Crosthwaite is here from. Anything about the BSA, James?
Not much. I've written to the BSA a few times asking for information, and it's either they don't collate that information or it's not available. So I asked them about how many societies have virtual only AGMs. They didn't know. I asked them if they had any statistics about turnout. They didn't have it, so I had to go and build it myself. They used to do a regular report on member engagement. They used to do it every 5 years. It has not been done, as far as I know, since 2015. So my sense has been, and again, my personal experience, but it does feel that the Building Societies Association is there to serve the management of the societies, not the members of those societies. And Ted Fisher here on this call, representing today, I understand the Building Societies Members Association, is an organisation that was started in the late 70s, early 80s, I believe, by a solicitor, Christopher Punt. And it was there because I think there was a recognition then, over 40 years ago, that such an organisation was needed to represent the members' interests of the building societies. And I think if anything that this journey for me so far has taught me is that organisation needs to be reinvigorated, because unfortunately over time, the societies, I think, are just exerting more and more influence through a series of kind of death by a thousand cuts of little things they've done that cumulatively have added up to, I think, a untenable situation.
James, thank you. We'll go to Kayvon. Kayvon, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself briefly and share any thoughts that come to mind for you about what's been explained so far, Kayvon. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, James. Really interesting, and there was a lot of crossover with what we do. I'm a consumer lawyer. I set up a consumer firm in 2017, predominantly to litigate against lenders, and really that's all we do. We took some motor finance cases to the Supreme Court in relation to unfair relationship and fiduciary duties. We lost on some points and won on some. Treasury applied to intervene, and that was refused, but FCA did intervene. So I've got first-hand knowledge of how the FCA behave and how they treat consumers, and also how lenders treat consumers. Um, some of the points that you were dealing with sort of stood out as uh, points that we deal with, really. Um, like the imbalance between the institutions, and you put ordinary member in your sense, and I would say consumer, because there's always an imbalance that we see uh, with the FCA and the way it is. And I'm going to cover a couple of things on the FCA, but we see a lack of accountability from lender organisations by large organisations, and really that's supported by the FCA. FCA doesn't make them, it doesn't force accountability. And really, it's the other way around, that there's an imbalance, and that imbalance is, in a sense, propagated by the FCA. And consumer protection or member protection, ordinary member protection for you, it's hollowed out. You said it's hollowed out. It is hollowed out. And I say, I'm just going to refer to two things really relevant, probably relevant to you as well, because in January 25, Nicola Rathi wrote to the Prime Minister in relation to a new approach to ensure regulator and regulation support for growth. And right at the bottom of his letter, it was a short letter, but he says, in particular, I'll read the paragraph so it makes sense. He said, enabling more informed risk taking requires enduring acceptance, as the Chancellor has recognised that we need to prioritise resources and that there will be failures. This acceptance needs to be shared across all accounting mechanisms, accountability mechanisms, including in Parliament. We will not stop all harm when making risk-based choices about the cases and intelligence we pursue, and we increasingly deploy technology to make those choices. Metrics for tolerable failures within the overall system could help to support this. So when I read that, I read it as the FCA asking the PM to say, what level of failure is acceptable and how do we manage it? And then in relation to motor finance, 8th of June, this was yesterday, the FCA, Nicola Rathi, has written to Dame Meg Hiller, chair of the Treasury Committee, and it's one very short paragraph, and he says, this also goes to the decision I have called for about appropriate risk appetite in the system, supported by clearer metrics to which we and others can be held accountable. So FCA keeps writing to parliamentarians and the PM to say what sort of risk is acceptable to put consumers at. And it shouldn't be lost on everybody. I mean, what's happening with you and Nationwide is really it's a reflection of what's happening in the wider financial system. The system is geared to support the system, not to protect the consumer. And as you said, Andy, the true purpose of finance, really, the true purpose of banking was to assist. I mean, that building society was to build houses. Lenders, particularly business lenders, they were supposed to assist in helping build a community, build society. They don't do it. They're interested in low risk lending and targeting consumer lending, focusing on getting as much out of that as possible without the return into society.
Yeah, you've triggered a memory for me, actually, which is back to that report that I wrote in 2008, which is why do mutuals exist? And they exist because they were designed to solve information asymmetry. The fact that you as an individual didn't have an understanding of what the portfolio was, and that all you could really understand was you, whereas the institution could understand everyone. And that asymmetry of information potentially creates the opportunity for abuse.
Yeah.
Customers are your shareholders. You are a mutual organization, you're member owned. That reason, that kind of agency problem just goes away.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in my view, most of financial services, the business model is predicated on customer ignorance and lethargy. And that's what we're really fighting against, in my mind.
And this is interesting. If you look at this from an international point of view, Kayvon, thanks for your input. If you look at this internationally, many people tell me that the way the banking system works, and the equivalent of the building society sector works in countries like Germany, they are very locally focused. They are very kind of almost Dad's Army, Mr. Mannering, old school type lending, where the organizations really get to know their customers and they really get to know the businesses they're putting money into. I say this because it seems like it is not impossible to do it in a high values, high ethics way. It's being done in other parts of the world. So there's no predetermination that there's some kind of mega trend at work here that means that we cannot do it well in the UK. We used to. Maybe that's what we should be striving for. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin, I've a specific question for you. I was interested when James explained that there's a bit of regulation or law somewhere that says he has a right to reach out to the other members of a mutual. I'm just wondering if you might have the appetite to kind of look at whatever the legal paragraph is about that, because it must be frustrating for James for him to have the right to do that, but not be able to do that. Isn't it interesting how this point overlaps into recent conversations we've been having about the Financial Services and Markets Bill, whereby legislation to support consumer interests is only real in practice if you can actually do what the legislation says you can do, if you get my drift. Any thoughts on that, Kayvon?
I'm happy to have a look at it. Did you get a reasoning from the FCA as well? James, you're on.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I've been very happy to talk to you about that, Kayvon, because I've got some pretty detailed kind of back and forth. That it's a pretty heavy bundle, if I'm honest with you. So yeah, happy to discuss that with you if you'd be interested in looking at it. But
surely it defeats the object of the rule effectively, because it's designed to allow you to contact members for these exact purposes.
Correct. Yeah, and the ration. I'll talk to you about it separately, but it was kind of, they gave one defence, I knocked it down, then they gave another defence, which was out of scope, out of the FCA's perimeter, but the FCA took it anyway.
Right. Okay.
I'll connect the two of you by email. Thank you, Kevin. That's great input. Well, folks, we've got a few minutes left. Anybody else like to chip in with any observations? Let's go to Claire. Claire works for a wonderful organisation called Share Action. I say this without any hesitation at all. I love Share Action. One of the very first ever ambassadors of the Transparency Task Force was Claire. Forgive me, Howarth. I've forgotten her first name. Catherine, how could I forget that? Share Action is all about the idea of people, society, holding organizations to account. That's a really bad introduction to you, Claire. Why don't you do a decent introduction and tell us what you wanted to raise your hand about? Go on, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. And good to meet you, James. So I'm here in a few capacities, actually. So I work for Share Action. I'm a senior UK policy manager at Share Action. I've been a member of Nationwide for over 17 years, and I'm a lawyer as well. And I have a particular interest in Nationwide because I have to say I didn't realise it was quite so bad, and now that I have, I'm really shocked by how it treats a member who is standing for election and following all the rules. And I have a specific query actually in relation to the FCA. And I wonder, James, whether you submitted an official complaint or whether you've considered taking this to judicial review. So the success rate in judicial review is very low, but it could potentially be a great way to put pressure on the FCA. So I wondered if you've considered that. And if that if you haven't done that yet, then my old firm, Phil Fisher, used to do and probably still does judicial review cases, and I might be able to connect you with somebody.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you, Claire. And so where did I get to with the FCA? At the end of the process, I said, "Can I appeal?" And they said, "There is no right to appeal." I said, "Okay, surely there's a right to complain." And they said, "Yes, there is. You can register a complaint." So I complained to the FCA. I laid out the cases why I thought under the FCA's rules, basically, you allege bias, you prove it, you're going to provide your evidence for that rather than proving it. And it was a very detailed complaint. There are a number of procedural errors in my view, some procedural unfairness. I think there was an element of the perimeter not being valid, a whole host of issues in my view. They responded 8 months later with a no case to be heard here. Here's £250 for keeping you waiting. And what I wasn't sure whether that was a deliberate ploy just to stall me out, or they really were just that inundated with the complaints that they couldn't get to mine, or it was particularly complex, or whatever the reason was. And I then recognized that there was only one other option on the complaint was then to go to the complaints commissioner. And then the last option then is judicial review. I haven't had time to really study the options on judicial review. I'm intrinsically concerned about the financial liability I bear personally. When you as an individual have to take the government to court, and the government can bring all of its resources to bear, I need to basically get comfort that I am protected in some way, that it can't be so financially punitive for me to do so that it's outside the realm of justice. And so if there is a route by which I can bring a judicial review, and it's not timed out for any kind of statutory reason, then I'm intrigued. But to some degree, the need has passed for my direct reason, which was to get the required nominations and be elected. It's not going to help me this year, but it's something I'd do again next year if I'm not successful. Because the guts of the letter basically said the communication I wanted to send to the members was, I would like you to nominate and elect me, not just nominate me. And I think it's very important that the FCA understood that, which is there should be an option for me to open up a line of communication with fellow members. And I think that can be done in a privacy by design way. And there is a precedent, because someone did this and they were successful in living memory, because I served the FCA with a Freedom of Information Act request to say, how many times has this happened before and how many times has it been successful? And there were people that were successful in the past. So it can be done. It's just a question, I think, of getting through the ins and outs of the obstacles they put in your place. And I have spoken to a few lawyers who focus on this element of the law, albeit from the Companies Act perspective, and they have some ideas. But I think it's important that that right is defended, albeit, it shouldn't be for a spurious reason. It should be for a very good reason, right? It's hard for a reason, and rightly so. But if there is a genuine reason for members to contact other members, I don't really understand why the FCA is seemingly siding on the side of the societies when that legal right exists.
Without spending too much time on it, that phrase there, the FCA standing on the side of the building societies, that really resonates with me, and it will resonate with people like Gordon Crosthwaite and others who were impacted by what we call the Building Society scandal, or the Phillips Trust Action Group scandal. We haven't got time to go into it now, but I can just imagine that dynamic at work. Claire, thanks for your input. Anything else, Claire, before we go to anybody else that wants to chip in?
I'm really interested in the quick vote actually, because that seems like the key mechanism here. And I wonder if there's any way to challenge that legally somehow.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, Claire. So I looked at it, that there isn't a great deal of case law. I posted a blog about the paucity of case law regarding the quick vote specifically. My sense is that there is appeals court judges, both in Australia and in England, going back, in some cases, 20, 30 years, in some cases, 100 plus years, that basically say, we are concerned if certain voting mechanics are used to entrench the position of directors. And that's about as close as I and as other supporters who've been looking at this have found as any. I think what it really is going to take is a test case, and someone basically taking a member-based organization using the quick vote to court and actually have a judge decide, is this fair, and legal within the legislation in force. But what's interesting is that there is clearly trade union legislation that prohibits a quick vote mechanic. And as we often find across the different primary legislation, there are inconsistencies. And I don't think the Building Societies Act, written originally in 1986, that was previous to that, was 30 and 50 and 70 years previous, right? It's been evolved over time, has been amended several times since. But I don't think anyone really envisaged people doing this. And until someone basically tests it in the courts, I think large institutions will largely get away with it, because who's going to take them on?
I'm going to put a note in the chat that my colleague Alexandra, head of events, will look at in the morning, asking her to connect Claire and James by email, and also Kayvon and James by email as well. I'll put that in the chat. Would anybody else like to squeeze in a quick comment before we start bringing this very interesting and important conversation to a close? Okay,
I would just like to say, Andy, thank you so much again for hosting this. Really very grateful for that. Thank you all for your interest and attention today. I really appreciate you taking the time to take an interest in what I'm doing. Please do get in touch if you're in a position to help, or you have any specific questions that you want to raise with me directly. I'd be delighted to discuss those with you. And I'm just going to cheekily put up my contact details and where you can see the campaign. If you want to take a screenshot of that or write anything down, I'll just leave it up for now. But yeah, we're delighted to hear from you.
So the email, james@james4nationwide.co.uk. So james@james4nationwide.co.uk. But we will be circulating James's slides shortly. We will also be producing a recording, and when Alexandra gives you all the connection to that recording, please use social media and whatever other means you've got to raise awareness of it. James, what you've been describing is one of the many, many, many David versus Goliath battles that we in TTF land are interested in and engaged in. There is systemic and structural unfairness in the system, and it will persist unless us as advocates for the consumer interest and the planetary interest successfully speak up and speak out. And one of the harsh realities, of course, is that sometimes these David versus Goliath battles make you think, you know what, it's going to be impossible to make a difference here. You know what, nobody else is doing it. Why should I? You know what, it's going to be too tough. I'm not going to try. And those mindsets are very, 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 very easy to fall into the trap of thinking. And that's why what I'm about to show everybody on the screen is something that's worth thinking about from time to time. You've all seen this before, I'm sure, many times. It's the very famous Margaret Mead quotation, which to my mind, in very plain English, says, you know, don't be despondent, don't give up, give it a go, work with like-minded people. Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has.
That's lovely, Andy. And if I may, I will counter with a quote of my own, which my wife gave me today, actually, because she's been suffering in silence while I go through this quite kind of aggressive part of my life. But she's a big fan of a lady called Natalie Haynes, who does a Stand Up for the Classics podcast. So she's a comedian that blends comedy and classics. And it was actually from a post that she made some time ago. But the quote is from a classical scholar and a historian called Trevor J. Saunders. And it's often misappropriated to Aristotle. The society that loses its grip on the past is in danger, for it produces men and women, I would say, who know nothing but the present, and who are not aware that life has been and could be different from what it is.
Wow, get it.
And all I would say is this has been an incredibly lonely task for a very long time. And it's the support of your friends and family that get you through it. Mm. And there just comes a point when the tide turns and you realize you're no longer on your own. All you have to do is just persevere. And if you can find the strength to do that, I would say you will prevail. So that is the attitude that I've taken into this. And if anyone else is out there fighting their own battles, please think about that. And if you need help or support or someone to talk to, please just contact me.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I've said it many times before, I'll say it again. I think I must be one of the luckiest people in the world to work with and have a chance to engage with people that we've been meeting here tonight and on other events we have as well. There's a real sense of purposefulness and a very authentic sense of purposefulness about our various collective endeavors. And I'm proud to be a part of what we are all doing. James, great job. Kayvon, thanks for your input. Claire, thanks for your input. Thanks everybody for your input. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much indeed. And remember, if you can vote for James, don't forget to do so. Good night,
And
all.
please, please, please do not use the quick vote. There's one thing to take away. Please do not use the quick vote. Thank you all. Lovely talking to you. Have a lovely evening.
Great stuff. Good night, all. Take care. Bye bye.